Unclimbed Mountains. Matthew 17. Yes, I need that picture later on, just after the service, the scripture too. Matthew 17, verses 1 to 9. Follow along with me as I read. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. Listen to him." The disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. And then Jesus came over and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus. As they went back down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Well, I'm here to report to you that the conga line is back and more popular than ever. Who here has done a conga line? Come on. Linda, you've done a conga line. Haven't you done a conga line at some party or some... You lead conga lines, Linda. I'm telling you right now. Hey, maybe we'll do one during the closing hymn. No, probably not. But anyway, the conga line is back, but it's a bit different now. It's a bit different. I'm not talking about the lines that, the conga line basically it's a line that you form with people at like some wedding reception back in the 90s. Remember those? And they were very popular back in the 90s. You go to every wedding reception and there'd be a conga line. Probably right after you sang that annoying Meatloaf song. Remember the Meatloaf song that was at every wedding, Paradise by the Dashboard Light? That's awful. But anyway, there's a new conga line as of late, but it's not at a party in a banquet hall. It's in a much different place. This new conga line forms near the summit of the highest peak in the world, specifically Mount Everest. There it is. In recent years, there has been so much interest in climbing Mount Everest, this godlike mountain, that people are flooding through Nepal on their way to the top of the world, right up there. Glory seekers and adventure junkies alike, and I know you're all adventure junkies out here. I know that's what you all are. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. Come on now. Anyway, they're dishing out average $50,000 to $60,000 in all of the fees and costs associated with this trip right here. $50,000 to $60,000 to make their attempt to touch the sky. That's what about it costs to try to get up onto this hallowed peak. Between permits and travel and all the gear, hiring the local Sherpas, the local guides that live there. Sherpas are the local Tibetan guys. They help people get up the mountain. Many people would say they actually drag all the other tourists up the mountain because they're far better mountaineers than all the tourists are that want to go there and climb the mountain. Anyway, they haul your gear, they do everything for you, and sometimes they actually guide the people to the top. Or at least they guide people at their attempt to summit the top of Mount Everest, which is very difficult to do. To summit Mount Everest, you have to go up into what is called the death zone. And some of you probably have heard about this. It's an altitude above 26,000 feet. 26,000 feet, that's like where planes fly. And when you're up there in that zone, humans cannot survive in that kind of environment, in that high altitude situation. Well, Everest is 29,000 feet high, so 3,000 feet of elevation gain at the last part of the climb is what's called the death zone. So the whole time the climber is up in this death zone, the climber is effectively dying that whole time. And it's a tremendous risk up there for things like heart attacks and strokes and all of these high altitude things that can happen in those situations. So basically, all these climbers right here are in the process of dying because they're up in that forbidden zone that humans can't survive. Even though they have oxygen, they still can't be up there. And actually, many climbers, as you have heard, I'm sure, do die when they attempt to make this climb up Everest. The worst year was 1996. 15 hikers perished that season in a very short period of time, and books were written about that event. Movies were made about that awful year back in 1996, but there have been a bunch of deaths since 1996, quite a few. Overall, there have been over 300 people that have died trying to hike this mountain. Most of the bodies are still up there because you can't get them down. By the time you summit Mount Everest, you have so little energy and ability that it's all you can do to get yourself back down the mountain. There's no way you could even help someone else get down the mountain. That's how horrible it is when you're up to that level. Some of these bodies are, most of them are still on the mountain. Some of them are actually next to the trail because it's too hard to move. So hikers just walk right past them. Sometimes, depending on the year, they have to step over them in order to get up to where they want to be. But, interesting enough, humans are weird. We're just strange people, aren't we? That doesn't stop people. None of that stops people. I think it actually motivates people because it's more popular than ever to try to do this. And actually, now, because this has become, almost too trendy, the new mountain, which is right near this, called K2, is another one of the Himalayas. That has become the new trendy mountain to try to climb with its own conga lines, getting to the summit. And the reason why this happens is because oftentimes there's only maybe 2, maybe 3 days where the summit can be climbed, depending on the weather. And so everyone who's waiting, they flood the top at that very moment where the window is there to go up there and to summit the mountain. But the lure is irresistible, and it calls many to rise up to its heights and stand on its shoulders for that feeling that they get, that larger than life, the feeling, I guess, of immortality maybe, which is ironic because so many people die trying to get that feeling of immortality. Safe to say that I will never, ever, ever even think about hiking Mount Everest or anything remotely close to such a thing. Well, maybe that's coming. But it doesn't mean I'm not drawn to the mountaintops, though. Many of us are. Most of us are. And if you can't climb, you're still drawn when you drive up through Franconia Notch. Come on. Driving up through the Notch. There's nothing like driving up through that notch where you see Cannon on the left and you see Lafayette on the right, and you just drive through there, and it's so majestic, those mountaintops up there. And when you're up there on top, we've taken church trips up to the top of Cannon on the tram. Remember that? A couple of times we've gone up there. And you get up to the top there, and I remember Phyllis. Is Phyllis here? Phyllis was like, Phyllis Danby, she was like sprinting to the top after we got off the tram. She wanted to see that view from the top of Cannon so much. It's exciting because you get this wonderfully awesome feeling, like this transcendent feeling when you're up there. And there's something amazing and magical about that, especially when you climb a mountain you've never climbed before. So, if you want to behold the glories of any summit, you must be willing to undertake the climb, which is not easy, but it's so worth it. One of my favorite summits of my life was Garfield up in the Whites. We were hiking, going to do an overnight up there in the camps. There's a campsite near there. Got there almost at sunset, got the tent pitched and set up, and just had enough time to do about the mile scoot right up to the top of the mountain right at sunset. So we got up there to the top of Garfield, which is right in the heart of the Whites, and the sun was glowing orange. And the whole place all around, all these mountains around, looked like it was just a fairy tale. How beautifully amazing it was. And I'll never forget that moment, just kind of being bathed in the glow of the evening sunset. It was an amazing mountaintop experience, and there's nothing like that in the world in my mind. Well, one day, Peter James and John followed Jesus up the side of a mountain, and it was not this one. I'm sure they were huffing and puffing all the way to the summit. And that's not really much of a conga line, just the four of them. I know, but certainly, and it certainly was not a particularly high mountain that they were climbing. There's just not a lot of high mountains where they were. But it was certainly an unclimbed mountain for them. They had never been up this mountain. And I mean physically that mountain, but also spiritually the mountain that they were climbing that day. At the top of that mountain, they saw something far more wild and crazy than a beautiful sunset. Jesus was transfigured before them. He was changed into this brilliant, glowing individual. And when the fleeting experience was all over, they knew their lives would never, ever be the same. And no one can really, for sure know what that experience was that they had. We have the words of it, but to experience what they saw and what they were a part of, we could there's no way we could really fundamentally grasp that. The best guess it was some kind of an immense vision of something in perhaps a spiritual realm. Let's take a look at verse 2. It describes it. And the Bible always does this. The Bible takes these amazing moments and condenses them into like 2 sentences. So we're always wanting more. But, it is what it is. Verse 2, as the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Verse 3, suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. This is a jaw-dropping experience for sure. If any of us were in that moment, we would be at a complete loss for words, probably down on our faces on the ground, not even sure what to do, think, or say. That would be our experience for sure. The disciples, they should have been just like absorbing this in and just being like immersed in this amazing vision that they were seeing and the gravity of the moment. But not Peter. He's a little bit different of a fellow. He wants to pitch a few tents at that moment in time. Verse 4, Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it's wonderful." It makes me laugh. This, Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. It's like, Peter, do you not know what to say? I'm thinking that he just had no idea what to say at this point in time. Did you ever get that? Like you're in a powerful moment and you have no idea what to say about it, so you wind up saying something dumb. It's like because you don't know what to. So Peter's like, if you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials: one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And of course, what Peter's thinking here is like, this is an unbelievable moment in time, and it should be memorialized for all time because this is significant beyond belief. Well, one might well expect that the sight of a radiant Jesus and Moses and Elijah, somehow they knew who they were right away, back from the dead or shown from heaven or something, but Peter, it should have brought him into silence. But Peter, I don't know, building like tents or to shelters to memorialize it, that would be very important to us as people. We like to do that. Special events happen. We like to have, like statues that commemorate or plaques that say something about it. They're just to remind us what that special moment was. But, truthfully, when you memorialize an event, it's valuable only to the extent that looking back, it kind of increases our awareness of what happened. It doesn't necessarily help us to remember or to think about the new ways that God's working in our lives right now. You understand what I mean? When you memorialize something, it brings our focus backwards, not in the moment now and what God could possibly be doing in our lives in the future. Memorials, and they're good things. I love them. They serve us best when it keeps us currently faithful in the moment that we're in to our ever-present God in our lives, who's always leading us in the moment into the future. Yeah, and I think some of the best examples of memorials that are wonderful, but yet sometimes can be difficult are, well, beautiful old church buildings. Anybody know of a beautiful old church building around here? And they are wonderful. Hey, we have two. One up here and one down there. And they're wonderful. They're beautiful. They're almost sacred to us. Almost. And they remind us of all of that has happened in the life of the church and in the life of spirituality within the community that they sit, like specifically ours. But there's our church buildings both were built in what we call the Second Great Awakening, which was a massive resurgence of belief in around the early 1800s in America, and churches were being built all around. And our two churches were part of that wave of awakening of spirituality in America. And it's beautiful, wonderful, and amazing. But in some ways, the memorial of it keeps us, those of us who have church buildings like this, keeps us in the past. It keeps us like remembering what God did. And sometimes we support the memory of what God has done over and above what God could possibly do right now in our lives. So I'm not suggesting that we sell off our church buildings, both of them, and go, find some corner to preach on. That's not what I'm suggesting. But we always have to remember that all that God has done, represented by our beautiful church buildings, is meant to move us into the future, to the new things that God wants to do now. That is what's most important. And that's what memorials should do in our lives. And oftentimes too, when we go to some place that's amazing, like say you go to the Grand Canyon or something like that, or when I was on top of Garfield, enjoying the sunset, what do we like to do when we're up there? We're like taking pictures and videos, and come over here, we'll get a video selfie of us both. And the funny thing is, you wind up missing the moment when you do that. So the new trend is, when you go to visit, beautiful spots, or you see a beautiful thing, is take your camera and put it away and just take it in. Because what it does to your soul when you're seeing it uninterrupted by trying to capture it on some sort of a digital photo or post it somewhere on some social media, it deters from the experience that you're in. And you go to a tourist spot and you see people all over the place, and they're doing this and they're doing that, taking pictures, desperate to preserve what they're seeing, so desperate that they barely even see it. We should always be looking to make new memories in our lives. And we should always be looking for God to make a new movement within the church and within his people, within us. Not just living in the old ones. We should always be looking for new mountaintops in our lives following Christ. Peter wants to make monuments to future generations as to what happened on that mountain. And so some moments, though, are just meant to be savored for what they are. So God quieted Peter. This is funny. Verse 5. But even as he spoke, or was still speaking, this is funny, God clammed him up. God's like, this is God saying, Peter, close your mouth. All right? You're ruining it. You're ruining the moment here, Peter. A bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. Here's the kicker. Close your mouth, Peter, and listen. Take it in. Absorb this moment where you are. Let it change who you even think this God is. Be transformed by it. And you can imagine Peter in his mind maybe saying, okay, God, sorry. Forget about the tents. I don't know what I was thinking. As if God was saying, stop, just for once, just concentrate on being, on receiving the wonder that's before your eyes, the wonder that can only come from scaling some unclimbed mountain in your life. When was the last time, I'm asking you, when was the last time that you set out to summit some sort of unclimbed spiritual mountain in your life? When was the last time that you thought in your heart, now there is where I want to be with God? I'm going to get there. When was the last time that was on your heart to do? And when we get up to these mountaintops, when we go to there, we have a much better than average chance of encountering God in a brand new way. John 3, 5 through 8. Do you have that, Daniel, our opening scripture? I just want to look at verse 8 of our opening scripture if you have that handy. Because, you can never dictate where God's going to show up. Yeah, go to verse 8 there. And I love what it says about, verse 8. The wind blows wherever it wants. Just as you can hear the wind but can't tell where it comes from or where it's going, so you can't explain how people are born of the Spirit. And then, like when you're on the top of a mountain, literally, physically, the wind is swirling all around you. And it's almost like, where is it coming from and where is it going? That's like what God is doing in our lives. We can't predict it. We can't control it or compact it or box it up for our own usage. God calls us to those places where we experience Him. And those are the places He calls us to, and we can't control that. But even though we don't really know, we don't decide the mountaintops that God's going to bring us to, we can do some things in our lives to put ourselves in the right place to experience these kind of experiences and the right times to have these mountaintop experiences. I don't know about you, but Amy Gardner's ordination council, I think that was a mountaintop experience in this church. And if you were there or a part of it in any way, shape, or form, you felt the wind of that Spirit. Just kind of blowing around. And as that gathering, that group from all the churches around, many churches around, came together for that moment. And I'll tell you too, any given food for thought, our community suppers, those are wonderful experiences in the Lord. And if you haven't come or you don't come every time, get yourself here. Get yourself here and let God bring you to a different place. Certainly helping out the homeless shelter up in Laconia too. It's just a different kind of experience, and if you want that experience, let me know and we'll put you in the rotation up there at the Isaiah 61 Cafe. You can help out too and just be a part of what the Spirit is doing in our area. That's how we get to those places. That's how you have a mountaintop experience, is you have to actually go there. It's not going to happen if we're just hanging around, sitting around on the couch. Doesn't work. Too many Christians are leaving too many mountains in their lives unclimbed. Do you hear me? Too many of us, and I put myself in that category too, are leaving too many spiritual mountains in our lives unclimbed. The path is there. The trail signs are all laid out, and we just don't climb up. But the greatest experiences of life are on those unclimbed mountains. Both physical mountains and especially spiritual mountains. What are those spiritual experiences that we're missing? What are they? What are the spiritual experiences that you are missing in your lives? The only way you can find out is start climbing. Start climbing that mountain. Russell Schwickart, I can't pronounce his name, Schwickart, he was an astronaut who flew a while back for the Apollo 9 mission. And like many of his fellow astronauts, he was up there in space. He discovered that this experience changed his life. Why wouldn't it? You're up in space. It's going to change your life. So the experience that really impacted him the most was when he was looking down from space to Earth. And this is what he said about it. He said, up there you go around every hour and a half, time after time, and you wake up in the morning like over the Mideast or over North Africa, and you look out your window as you're eating breakfast, and there's the whole Mediterranean Sea just sitting there in Greece and Rome and the Sinai and Israel. And you realize that what you're seeing in one glance was the whole history of humanity for centuries, the cradle of civilization. He said, then you go across the Atlantic Ocean, back across North Africa, and you do it again and again and again. You identify with Houston and then with Los Angeles and Phoenix and New Orleans. And the next thing you know, you're starting to identify with North Africa again. And you look forward to it. You anticipate it as you're going around the earth, and the whole process of what you identify with begins to shift. He said this, he said, when you go around it every hour and a half, you begin to recognize that your identity is with the whole thing, is with the whole earth. And that makes a very powerful change inside of you. As you look down, you can't imagine how many borders and boundaries you cross again and again. You can't even see them. Still, you know that there are thousands of people fighting over some imaginary lines that you can't even see. And you wish you could say to them, look at that. Look at what I'm seeing. What is important here? He couldn't see that unless he was up where he was. He couldn't see what was truly important in life until he was up in space, orbiting the earth. That's kind of like what a mountaintop experience does for us. And the question always comes, what is truly important in life? Is it the many tasks and duties and chores and errands and assignments that fill our days? No. I mean, we have to do those. Yeah, we do. But that's not what truly is life-changing. It's those big picture kind of moments. Those intervals of stillness and of calm. The times of being still and knowing that the Lord is God. Sensing the Holy Spirit is working something new and powerful in your heart. I want to sense that. I want to feel that as much as I can. I want to experience that as much as I can. You know, there are conga lines going up to the highest peaks of the world. Everest and K2. People are lining up for a chance to be the tallest person on earth for a few moments' time. But many, many spiritual mountains are desolate, unexplored, unmapped, unvisited. And here it is. We wonder why we're not as close to God as we would like to be. He's calling us, but we're not going. He's calling us on. But sadly, and I put myself right in here too, we are too content with the superficial satisfaction of everyday life to go off on a new experience. It's a lot of work to climb a spiritual mountain, we say. Rather watch a movie of someone else who's done it, you know, and just kind of glean off their experience. Wow, that's exciting. You know, we can watch movies of people doing things and living life, or we can actually go out and live life. I mean, what are we going to get to in our world? Are we going to take pictures of movies because that's our experience? Quick, this is a great movie. Take a picture. Get in front of it. Have a selfie. It's a movie. Capturing someone else's moment. You know, I think about our Tuesday morning Bible study. We're watching a fabulous production, The Chosen, on the life of Jesus. It is A+. Never seen one better by any stretch. But it's just a show. It's just a video production. It's not the end. It should give us a burning passion to go out and live it, to go out and get on our own mountaintop. You know, many of us are quite frankly, afraid to scale unclimbed spiritual mountains in our lives. And there are conga lines out there, many of them. They're walking the easy path in this world. But very few are on the unclimbed mountain paths because, you know, too many followers of Jesus, and I put myself again in this category, too many of us are too scared to follow him up unclimbed mountaintops. Verse 6. The disciples were terrified, fell face down on the ground. This is important. Then verse 7, Jesus came over and touched them. Get up. Don't be afraid. And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone. And this is key. And they saw only Jesus. You know, the way to climb the highest unclimbed spiritual mountain is to keep your eyes on Jesus. You know, look, you don't need to hike Everest-sized mountains in this world, believe me. You don't need a Saturn V rocket, you know, as the astronauts did to see a different vantage point on this earth. All you need to do is walk slowly and steadily up the side of a spiritual mountain that God has placed before you. Say, God, I'm going to do it. You know, we don't need, you know, the lung-bursting strength or endurance of an athlete. All you need is persistence and a willingness to set aside the time needed to make that ascent up that spiritual mountain. Take as much time as you need. The mountain's still going to be there, but don't put off starting. The 40 days of Lent are coming. What a wonderful time to start a spiritual climb. There's no better time to do it. There's no better season for it. And there's a lot of unclimbed mountains in the season of Lent. Pick one. Pick one and climb it. Can you stand up and sing our final hymn today?